Hi everyone, and welcome to week 8 of our Sweet Childhood Memories Sew Along, hosted by Pat Sloan at her website ilovetomakequilts.com. If you haven't done so already, jump over to Pat's website, download this week's free pattern, come back here and I'll show you how to do it. This week's block consists mostly of half square triangles with a few background squares added in. We need 4 of one size half square triangles, so I'm going to do those 2 at a time, and we need 16 of the other size half square triangles, so I'm going to do those in 2 lots of 8 at a time. To do the 8 at a time method, I've started with a 6 1/4 inch square, and you can see me here drawing a diagonal line in both directions, corner to corner. I'm going to start this tutorial by doing the two at a time half square triangles. So to do those, we just draw a diagonal line in one direction, and then we place that together, right sides together with our other piece of fabric, and we sew 1/4 inch on each side of our drawn line. We then take that to the pressing mat and press it before cutting them apart on our drawn line. And then we're going to press to the darker of the 2 fabrics, and I'll meet you back at the chopping mat to do the trim down process. If you've been a long time watcher of my block tutorials, you'll know that I prefer to trim my half square triangles down 2 at a time. To do this, I make sure that I have my seam there nested nice and snugly before placing my 6 1/2 inch square ruler with the diagonal line on the stitching line, ensuring I have enough fabric outside my required trim down measurement on all 4 sides before trimming the first 2 sides. I then rotate the block, and I place our required trim down measurement on my freshly trimmed sides. I also ensure that I still have my diagonal line on the ruler along the stitching line before trimming the last 2 sides. Following this trim down, we'll move on to the 8 at a time method. For the 8 at a time method, we simply need to place our squares right sides together because we've drawn our lines previously, take those to the machine and sew 1/4 inch away from both sets of our drawn lines. Sometimes you might want to secure these with a pin because you are working with bigger pieces. With our stitching now done, we first need to give this a good press to just flatten out any tension that was caused by the feed dogs, and to also set our stitches while we have more structure in our block. We then need to cut this block in half, both vertically and horizontally, and because we started with a 6 1/4 inch square, I need to place my ruler on the edge of our square at the 3 1/8 mark and cut, and then do it again from our other edge at the 3 1/8 because it is 6 1/4. We then can cut it apart on both of the diagonals before pressing to the darker of the 2 fabrics and trimming down. With all of those cut apart and pressed now, I am going to use the same makeshift block lock ruler that I made last week with my painter's tape on the diagonal line of my 3.5-inch square. I'm going to make sure that that ledge that I created butts up on my seam and that I have enough fabric outside my required trim down measurement, in this case 2.5 inches. Trim 2 sides, rotate the block and the tool, butt my ledge up again, line up my 2.5 on the freshly cut edges and trim the final 2 sides. Do this for all 16. Work towards final construction of this block, we do have a few more little units to make, and that is the corner sashings for our large half square triangles. You can see me here laying it out 2 at a time as per the pattern, and we will start by sewing our sets of 2 half square triangles together. As my little minion friend Eric said, oops, and there was an oops indeed. If you were paying attention during my little sewing part there, you would have seen me turn my half square triangles around. This results in them being sewn together incorrectly. I go along and I clip all the seams, as you see me doing here, so that I can push the bulk in either direction, but I don't figure out that they're sewn together incorrectly until I'm going to press them. So I will fast motion through this part while I fix all of that up. But basically, sew your pairs of half square triangles together, clip down to the seam line, press the bulk in either direction, and I'll meet you back when we're at that point.
A few moments later.
Thanks for bearing with me while I fixed my massive error. As you would have seen though, during that fast motion, I still had 2 that were sewn together incorrectly, and I'm just fixing up the last one here. When I clip the seams, I push the bulk in opposite directions to the path of least resistance to make the block as flat as possible. We're now going to attach the corner square to 4 of our half square units here before moving on to the final construction of each 4 blocks that make up the final block. While I'm at the sewing machine anyway, I'm also going to sew these units on to the side of my large half square triangles, and then I'll only have 1 horizontal seam left to do. We're now going to clip these units apart and give them a press. On the units with the solid corner, we'll press towards that solid block, and the other pieces will press towards the half square triangle. We'll then sew our final vertical seam and we'll be ready for final block construction. With that final seam now sewn, we just need to press these units before moving on to final block construction. In this instance, I'm pressing towards the larger half of the two, so towards the large half square triangle. We could spin the seam at that intersection there because of all of the fabrics that are coming together, but for some reason I chose not to. But you do see me giving a little clip there so that I can flip the bulk from that half square triangle in the direction that I want. After we have all of these pressed, we can move on to final block construction. The final construction of this block is done as a 4-patch. So to do a 4-patch, we first sew the vertical seams and then we'll sew the one horizontal seam and our block will be done. We need now to just press these in opposite directions to complete our 4-patch, and you will see me throughout this section do a few clips because I had to flip a few seams so that they would nest nicely. This isn't a necessary step, it's just a step that I do. With our final seam now sewn, I just have to clip a few of these again as I flipped them when I was sewing to nest the seams, and we're going to give this a final all over press. Once again, we could have spun the seams at the intersection in the center there, but for some reason I didn't do that in this instance. Thanks for joining me again this week, folks. Hopefully you've enjoyed this week's video, and if you haven't done so already, click the like button, share the video with a friend, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. If you do subscribe, make sure to click that little bell icon to be notified of all my future updates. As always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.